My name's Richie Thompson. I'm the BHA's Faith Schools and Education Campaigns Officer. Some people have asked me this weekend why my name badge is pinned on and not hanging around my neck. Well, apart from meaning that I can't be strangled, it's because I'm actually kind of here in two different capacities. I'm also the president of the AHS, the Atheist, Humanist and Secular Student Federation. We don't actually have a society at Goldsmiths at the moment, Chris, so maybe we can do something to fix that. And I've been talking with Richard, one of Chris's students who he brought with him to volunteer this weekend, about maybe getting something going. But anyway, Chris French is a professor and the head of the Anomalistic Research... Sorry, I've completely fussed that. Chris French is professor and the head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit at Goldsmiths, University of London. Thanks. He is also a fellow of the British Psychological Society and is on the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, as well as being a distinguished supporter of the BHA. He is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the British False Memory Society and has published over 100 articles and chapters covering a wide range of topics on psychology. His main area of research is the psychology of paranormal beliefs and anomalous experiences. He also frequently appears on radio and television. He contributes fairly regularly to The Guardian, and he's the editor of Skeptic magazine. So, Chris French.
Thanks very much, Richie, and thank you for all coming along today. Stephen's talk set mine talk up quite nicely, so I want to thank him for that. But just to clear up one potential misunderstanding, when Stephen put the slide up talking about the study that we'd done on alleged crystal power, and there was the quotation wasn't from me. Okay? At least one member of the audience thought it was. I just wanted to clear that up. It was directed towards me rather than being from me. Okay. As I say, when I was invited to take part in the conference and I was told that the theme was the meaning of life, I thought this would be quite a nice opportunity to just do a talk, specially prepared just for you guys, on situations where we see meaning where in fact there isn't any. I mean, this is obviously one of the themes of anomalistic psychology. It's one of many themes. Anomalistic psychology, a brief summary would be, it's an attempt to try to explain ostensibly paranormal experiences and paranormal beliefs in terms which don't involve any kind of paranormal forces. We're looking for psychological explanations. Now, one of the themes that runs through it is that we look at various cognitive biases. Although our cognitive systems are amazing, they are prone to certain biases, and it might be that these biases that affect perception, memory, judgment, a whole range of other psychological processes might underlie some of the situations where people think they've experienced something paranormal, but in fact they haven't. And so I want to focus today, I say, just on one of those biases. The question arises, why have we evolved minds that work that way? Why do our brains work in such a way that we do make these systematic errors? And Stephen's more or less set up the answer here. The reason for that, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, then it makes sense that we have evolved brains that help to keep us alive. Our brains have evolved for survival, not for direct apprehension of the truth about the way things are. And typically, in terms of a kind of cost-benefit analysis, it makes much more sense for us to do our thinking and our decision-making in terms of heuristics, quick and dirty rules of thumb that usually give us the right answer, rather than a more long-winded, slower, reflective process that might give us the right answer slightly more often. Now, we are capable of both forms of thought, and I mean, typically, kind of the scientific process would be a very good example of the latter, where we go through things very slowly and reflectively. But in general, day-to-day life, we don't think like that. We think very much in terms of quick decisions. We use our intuition a lot, and usually that's fine, but it can lead us into error. Now, there are two kinds of errors that we can make. We can make what's called a type 1 error, where we mistakenly think that we have seen some kind of pattern or meaning or significance when in fact there isn't any. Or we can make a type 2 error, where we mistakenly deny that there is anything meaningful or significant when in fact there is. And these are both important kinds of errors, but from an evolutionary perspective, we've evolved in such a way that, again, I always use the same example that Stephen used. The Stone Age man who stood there scratching his beard, wondering whether that rustling in the bushes really was a saber-toothed tiger, was not going to pass on his genes to the next generation. The Stone Age man who just assumed it was a tiger and got the hell out of there, whether it was or it wasn't, was going to actually survive better. So I'm going to give you, what I'm going to do is give you lots of different examples of situations where these natural predispositions that we have lead us to think that we can see meaning where in fact there isn't any. So this is what we're really talking about. The difference between order and chaos, and how do we make those kind of decisions, what kind of biases come into play. One of the themes that I'll talk about a lot is top-down processing. The idea is, and this has kind of become pretty much accepted within modern cognitive psychology, that when you are going about your daily business, there's two types of processing involved. On the one hand, you've got the information that's coming in through your senses, through your ears, your eyes, etc., etc. And this raw sensory input is sometimes referred to as bottom-up information. And in order to make sense of that, the role of top-down processing comes in. The influence of top-down processing, your belief, your knowledge, your expectations about the way the world is. And the idea is that the interaction between top-down processing and bottom-up information, bottom-up processing, actually you produce a mental model of the world, and you're constantly updating this and your place in it, and you constantly update this on the basis of new information as it comes in. Now, as you might imagine, if you've got, for any reason, if the information that's coming in is degraded in some way, or if it's inherently ambiguous, then the influence of the top-down processes is going to be that much stronger. And you might end up thinking that you've seen something that isn't really there if you expected whatever it was to actually be in the area. So I'm going to go just very quickly through lots of different examples of this. The most extreme examples of making connections between things and seeing significance when, in events and so on, when it's not really there, involves psychotic breakdown. So in various types of psychotic breakdown, but particularly schizophrenia, people can end up making connections between everything. Everything seems significant in some way. And the phrase that was coined by Conrad back in 1958 to refer to this was apophenia, the unmotivated seeing of connections, and also specific experience of an abnormal meaningfulness. So it's not just that, you could see a face in the cloud, but the face actually meant something. It was very, very significant. These days, the term tends to be used a little bit more loosely, a bit more widely than that. That's what Conrad meant by it. Lots of examples in the literature. This is from August Strindberg, the Swedish writer, in 1897. I once found he was having a schizophrenic breakdown at the time. I once found my pillow, which I had crumpled when taking my midday rest, so moulded that it looked like a marble head in the style of Michelangelo. These occurrences could not be regarded as accidental, for on some days the pillows presented the appearance of horrible monsters, of gothic gargoyles, of dragons, and one night I was greeted by the evil one himself. And you imagine the sheer terror, you're just about to get into bed and there's Simon Cowell looking up at you. I mean, it'd be awful. Now, it's not just during psychotic breakdown that these kinds of things happen. Much more boring example here, maybe. We're very poor at recognizing randomness. We often think we can see meaning and significance in what actually are just random sequences. These examples here of coin tosses, 30 coin tosses, and if I were to ask you the question, which of these three sequences is the least likely to occur, I suspect that your intuitions would tell you it's obviously sequence A. That's never going to happen if you toss a fair coin 30 times. Now, obviously you're a very intelligent audience and you probably actually know that the answer really is all 3 sequences are equally likely. If you pre-specify what the sequence is going to be, then the chances that you're going to get it right for the first position are a half, for the second position it's a half times a half, and so on. So a half times by itself 30 times is the same probability for all of them. But your intuition tells you that's not random. That's not random. Can't be random. In actual fact, as I say, they're all equally likely. But if I ask you a slightly different question, I mean, the truth is that only one of those 3 sequences was actually generated by me sitting there as I prepared this talk, tossing a coin 30 times. I actually did do it, honestly, and I did it just once. And one of those sequences is the sequence that came up. Now, it's a slightly trickier question, but I suspect that if you thought about it, there'd probably be a tendency to go for that sequence as being likely to be the one I produced. The one I actually produced was sequence C. I mean, I think the sequence C tends to look pretty random until you get to here, and then you get 5 tails in a row and then 4 heads. And you think, no, that's not random. But actually, that is what came up. Furthermore, if you actually do the maths on it, it turns out that for a run of 30 heads and tails, you have got a 2/3 chance of getting a run of 5 in a row, all identical. But that's not what our intuition tells us. Our intuition tells us that, no, random means all jumbled up. Now, one of the biases that we have when it comes to randomness, we tend to avoid repetition. The idea that something in a sequence will repeat if it's random doesn't really make a lot of sense to us. Random means all jumbled up, doesn't it? But of course, in reality, a random sequence, what occurs at any one position is completely independent of what occurs at any other position. So you will get long runs like that. The fact that I then got 4 heads immediately following my 5 tails was purely a fluke. But that's the way randomness is. It's predictably unpredictable. You will find what look like meaningful patterns. This can lead to some interesting illusions. Thomas Gilovich, an American psychologist, has studied the hot hand in basketball. And the hot hand refers to situations where players are just hot. In other words, every time they throw the ball, it goes into the basket. Other times, you see a player and everything they do goes wrong. Every time they throw for the basket, they miss. When you're cold, when you're hot, you're hot. When you're cold, you're cold. And this idea of the hot hand is something, it makes intuitive sense. You can imagine that if your first attempt at the basket is a hit, that increases your confidence, calms your nerves. The next time you throw, you're quite likely to get that one in as well, and so on and so forth. So this belief in the hot hand is endorsed by players, fans, and coaches. It's universally accepted. The only problem is, as you probably guessed this was coming, it's entirely illusory. If the hot hand and the cold hand were real effects, you would expect to find more long runs of hits and more long runs of misses than you actually do find. When you do analyze the sequences, you find they're exactly what you'd expect. If you look at the performance of a particular player with a particular hit rate, say 0.8 of his throws, one in every 5 times he misses, then the actual sequence in terms of runs is exactly what you'd expect by statistics. But the illusion is very, very strong. Another example, the good old Bible code. Now, you may have heard of the Bible code. In case any of you haven't, the claim was made that if you take the Hebrew Bible and you perform certain procedures on it, you can find hidden messages within the Bible. And these messages apparently predicted events which didn't actually take place until hundreds of years after the Bible had been written. I'll just go through that in a bit more detail. The procedure you follow, you start with any letter in the Hebrew Bible, and then you take every nth letter after that, where n can take on a very wide range of values, anything from 1 up to several thousand. When you've got that, you form a matrix of all the letters, and once you've got your matrix, you then start looking for the hidden messages. Okay? And I'll give you an actual example. Here's one of the hidden messages that was found. And you can see there that if you translate these words, it's Obama, Nobel, his prize, peace. It's clearly a prediction of Obama receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, obviously, the obvious objection to this is, well, it's just a coincidence. But the original claim was based on a paper published by proper mathematicians at a proper university, where their analysis suggested that you couldn't explain this away just as coincidence. It was then that a guy called Michael Drosnin heard about this research, and he wrote a bestseller about it called The Bible Code, which you may have heard about. Drosnin's book takes a lot of liberties that the original mathematicians didn't. That's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? You know what's coming next. Drosnin issued a challenge. He said this only works with the Hebrew Bible. It won't work with any other text. You know, take any other text. Take Moby Dick. You won't find these hidden messages. Well, as I've just given away, skeptics did that. They did the same procedures with Moby Dick and with a variety of other sources of literature, and they found loads of hidden messages. Brendan Mackay was the Australian mathematician who took up the challenge with Moby Dick. He found predictions relating to, amongst many other things, the assassinations of Indira Gandhi, Leon Trotsky, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy. And we'll leave the final word on this with the inimitable James Randi. The bottom line, of course, is that if you have a big enough text and the rules are as loose as they are, you can find anything you want. Now, coincidence, so the fact that we have these problems when it comes to probability estimation, there are lots of situations in everyday life where we have to estimate probabilities, and we're just lousy at it. We're just not very good. This goes across the board, believers and skeptics. Why is this relevant? Well, because a lot of the time, the way that we might want to explain away an ostensibly paranormal event is in terms of the possibility that it was just a coincidence. So you're sitting there thinking about a friend that you've not seen for many, many years. The phone goes, you pick it up, and it's them. Spooky. You have a dream about something, and a few days later something happens in real life that bears a striking correspondence to the dream. Did you in some way get a glimpse of the future? Well, maybe, or maybe it was just a coincidence. Now, coincidence seems like a really unsatisfactory explanation, particularly for believers, but in many ways, you can see why people have got a problem with that as an explanation. For a start, the emotional impact, if you're the person that's on the receiving end of that event, there is a real wow factor there. It's undeniable that there's a wow factor. And so there's that emotional impact, which just to kind of have it explained away as, probably just a coincidence, then doesn't really seem to do the job. But also, if you take a more rational, less emotional approach, you can sometimes work out, or at least estimate, the probabilities involved. And you might say, yeah, but come on, the chances that that would happen after I'd had that dream are literally millions and millions to one. You can't say that was just a coincidence. But again, sit back and think about it. Maybe you can. The fact is that 6 billion people dream every single night. What would take some explaining is if none of them ever had a dream that then appeared to come true. That would be really spooky. That would take some explaining. The number of people you think about in a day and the phone doesn't go at all, or the phone goes and it's somebody else. You don't notice that. It's a non-event. The phone goes and it's the person you were thinking of, and hey, wow, spooky. And if it's someone that you've not seen for a very long time, well, even more wow. That's absolutely incredible. But as I say, those kind of biases we all have. The way psychologists have studied these things is by giving people probability estimation problems. This is probably one of the most famous ones. Some of you will have seen it before. The famous birthday problem. How many people do you need to have at a party to have a 50-50 chance that 2 of them share the same birthday? Ignoring the year, just the actual date. Now, if you think about this, if you've got 2 people randomly selected, you've got 1 chance in 365 that they're going to have the same birthday. If you've got 366 people, you are absolutely certain that there must be at least 1 pair with the same birthday, because if by some strange fluke the first 365 all had different birthdays, the next one must match somebody because you've used up all the dates of the year. So somewhere between 2 and 366 is this magic number where you have a 50-50 chance. Now, if you ask people, they will typically say 180, 200, 120. The answer is you need 23 people. That's all. 23 randomly selected people, and you will have a 50-50 chance that you've got at least 1 pair with the same birthday. That strikes most people as being far too low. Your intuitions tell you, no, it must be more than that. Well, it's not. That's the actual answer. It turns out that, as I say, we're all very bad at these probability estimation problems. There's some suggestive evidence, but the evidence is mixed, I must admit that maybe people who believe in the paranormal tend to be a bit worse than people who don't. But it's not a very big effect if it is indeed there at all. Another example of reading meaning into things when maybe we shouldn't has been given the title Subjective Validation by Marx and Kamen, David Marx and Richard Kamen, back in the 1980s. Subjective validation is a form of confirmation bias. They define it as this way. They say, this occurs when two unrelated events are perceived to be related because a belief, expectancy, or hypothesis demands or requires a relationship. Now, there's lots of examples I could give you, but I'm just kind of sampling things here just to give you a flavour. One of the examples, again, something that Stephen referred to in his talk, is psychic readings. When a believer goes for a psychic reading, they are basically faced with a situation where the psychic will come out with lots and lots of information. They will say a lot, and a lot of it will be vague and ambiguous and open to interpretation and so on. But because they believe the psychic does have this special power, this amazing insight into their lives, then they will be looking for connections. And it's one of those situations where, seek and ye shall find. I'll just give you, again, one specific example. One of the sittings which I analysed, there was a young woman who'd had a reading with a psychic, and at the end of it she was really, really impressed. And one of the things that had most impressed her was the fact that the psychic knew that her mum's name was Sheila. And that is quite impressive, let's face it. I mean, it's not a particularly uncommon name, but to actually get that detail correct would be pretty impressive. But of course, when you replayed the tape, what you actually saw was that at no point did the psychic say, your mum's name is Sheila. What the psychic did was to come out with lots of names throughout the readings, most of which meant nothing to her whatsoever, but at one point said, I'm getting the name Sheila. And in her mind, that's my mum. She's the one who made the connection, but then subsequently, when she's telling other people about it, he knew that my mum's name was Sheila. Well, no, he didn't actually, but that's the way she remembered it. And that's the way kind of subjective validation works. It applies in lots of contexts. Particularly, there are certain contexts where, the examples I gave at the very beginning were situations where people were making connections or finding significance in a very intuitive way. These were things that you couldn't really help your intuitions leading you in a particular direction. Situations where subjective validation happens, you have to look a little bit for the connections, but because you're expecting them to be there, you will find them. And psychic readings are a good example because psychics will often say, what comes through to me, I might not know what it means. I'm just transmitting the information. You are the one who's got to make sense of it. It will mean something to you. So, they're explicitly telling you, you do the work, I'll take the credit. But anyway. Now, psychic readings, I say, are a good example because it's one of those contexts where you expect the language interaction not to be quite normal. You're going to have to do some work to find the meaning and significance. Another situation where that might arise, where you have this searching for meaning, is in a psychotherapeutic context. Again, I'm just going to go very quickly. There's a few slides on this, and I'm going to read through them very quickly. There's an interaction between a therapist and a client. The therapist is in italics. So she says, men are all alike. The reply, in what way? They're always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Well, my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here? He says I'm depressed much of the time. I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed. It's true, I am unhappy. Do you think coming here will help you not to be unhappy? Well, I need some help, that much seems certain. What would it mean to you if you got some help? Perhaps I could learn to get along with my mother. Tell me more about your family. Well, my mother takes care of me. Who else in your family takes care of you? My father. Your father. You're like my father in some ways. What resemblance do you see? You're not very aggressive, but I think you don't want me to notice that. What makes you think I'm not very aggressive? You don't argue with me. Why do you think I don't argue with you? You're afraid of me. Does it please you to believe I'm afraid of you? My father's afraid of everybody. What else comes to mind when you think of your father? Bullies. Does that have anything to do with the fact that your boyfriend made you come here? Now you can see, I mean, it's not a very exciting interaction, but you can see, I mean, it would be typical of a kind of Rogerian therapist. It's very non-directive. It's just, sorry? It is Eliza. That was going to be the punchline. But I mean, you get the impression there that someone, it comes across as being a genuine interaction between a client and a patient. A lot of the things that the therapist is saying are not really maybe what you'd expect in a normal conversation. A lot of times just reflecting back what was said, but that's how Rogerian therapy works. And at the end of it, you get this kind of very wise insight. The word bullies comes up, and suddenly it's back to reference to the boyfriend making you come here. Now the point is, as we've just heard, this is in fact not an interaction between a therapist and a patient. This is a version of a program called Eliza. This particular version was called Doctor. It was a very early computer program, which was fairly primitive. It doesn't make, unlike some more modern attempts, there's no attempt here to actually understand the meaning, the semantics of what's going into the program. It just works using a few simple tricks so that there's certain keywords that if it picks up on the word depressed, I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed. Very often it just reflects back what's been said to it. And if it gets stuck, then it just refers back to something earlier in the conversation. But the illusion that's produced that there is some kind of real intelligence going on there is actually quite strong. And what Joseph Weizenbaum, who developed this program at MIT, reported was that very often people would refuse to believe that they were interacting with a dumb computer program. They were convinced that this was a really insightful person that they were interacting with. So again, it's another example, and it's quite similar to the interactions with psychics, where again, you're trying to make sense of what they're saying to you if you're playing the game. Right, a few more examples of our ability or our tendency to see meaning when perhaps there isn't any. Another example would be something called Pareidolia, a type of illusion or misperception involving a vague or obscure stimulus being perceived as something clear and distinct. Now, one of the things that we very often see in random visual patterns is faces. Faces are a hugely important stimulus for us for lots of obvious reasons, and indeed parts of the brain are hardwired to process faces. So we tend to see them in some fairly unusual situations. Right, this is a picture, an aerial photograph of Selhurst Park, which is where Crystal Palace play, and some people think they can see a kind of Turin shroud-like image of Christ there. So, we wondered if maybe they should change the name, I don't know. I am not responsible for any of these captions. Here's another example. This is a woman who found the image of Christ in the burn marks on her burrito, and she's obviously delighted by her discovery. This reminds you've seen the wonderful Mitchell and Webb sketch where they cut open the fruit and look at the seeds inside, and it says, "There is no God." It's fantastic. This is a classic. This is a cinnamon bun that some people think bears a striking resemblance to Mother Teresa. Just in case you can't see that little animation there to help you. So that's Nun Bun, the Immaculate Confection. Coming a little bit more up to date, if this will let me. This is a grilled cheese sandwich, which, again, some people felt there was an image of, I'm not sure whether it's Madonna or the Madonna there. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Toast. This went for $28,000 on eBay. So it really is worth keeping your eyes open. It's now apparently in a casino somewhere, obviously going to bring people lots of luck. Now, I will need to explain the caption on the next slide. Right, now I will explain the caption, okay. This is a computerized tomography scan of a left testicle in a guy who had an undescended right testicle. And as the medic that wrote the paper up for a journal said, rather tongue-in-cheek, I hope, well, you could see why the other testicle hadn't come down, because would you want to share a scrotum with that? But again, it kind of nicely illustrates this tendency we have. And one, obviously, I couldn't leave this one out. There she is. The lovely Kate and a jelly bean. Yeah, you probably saw this in the papers. I mean, you could easily confuse the two, couldn't you, really? I mean, it's just such a striking resemblance. Now, it's not only in the visual domain that we pick up on these patterns that are really just random patterns. Also, you get similar effects in the auditory domain. And one of my favourite examples refers to something called electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP. And the claim is made by many paranormal investigators that if you leave a recorder in record mode in a supposedly haunted location, you can actually record spirit voices. Now, typically, these recordings are very, very poor quality. I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. This claim was it's been around for a while, but it is still a kind of standard. I was actually on a ghost investigation only this week, and I've been listening to lots of EVP, and it really is awful stuff. The point is, obviously, the sounds that you actually record could either be real human voices that you just weren't aware that there were people in the vicinity at the time. They can sometimes be radio signals that have been picked up. Depends on the technique that you're using to make the recording. And sometimes they're probably not speech sounds at all. But the one thing you can be sure of is that they'll be very, very poor quality. And typically, you find that you can't actually hear what the message is until someone tells you. Okay? So, again, I think there's kind of quite a nice kind of hierarchy here, from situations where we can't but help see some kind of meaning that isn't there, to other situations where we have to look around for it a bit, but we're good at doing that, we're good at making these connections, to this kind of third set where someone has to tell you what the meaning is, but once they've told you, sorry, was I so far away from the mic for all that? Can you hear? Sorry, I've just realised I should have had it closer. Sorry about that. I'll start again. All right. Right, and there's kind of third situation where you actually have to be told what the meaning is, but once you've been told, then that really influences the way that you perceive the stimuli. So I'll give you a few examples of this. These are actual examples of EVP taken from the internet, and I want you to see whether you can tell me what the spirits are saying. Any offers? No, I'll give you another go. Look, quite a few different things. Well, that's one of the interesting things, that of course different people hear different things. According to the website, the message is the coward. So now I'm going to play it again and see if you can hear the message this time. You kind of can, yeah. Give you another example. Any offers? There was a few people. I think somebody said it there. Out of the four I heard, one of them was right. I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to hear. You're supposed to say, "We're sorry." Somebody did say sorry, didn't they? Somebody, yeah, well done. Give that man a prize. So I'm going to play it again now and see if you can hear the message this time. Okay, you can hear that. Another example. This one actually I do find quite spooky, to be honest. Yay, very good. First time. So that was, get out of my house. Right. So as I say, bear in mind, I think that probably is someone genuinely saying, "Get out of my house," to these paranormal investigators. Right. I'll give you one more example. And okay. Any offers? Give you another go. Well, the answer is, come and find the cake. So, okay, here we go. You'll hear it this time. See? Come and find the cake. Well, actually, you see, it's not. According to the website, it's something, we thought it sounded more like come and find the cake, but according to the website, it's someone's in the way. I'll play it again, and this time you can probably kind of hear someone's in the way. I still hear come and find the cake, personally, but try and hear someone's in the way. No, it's come and find the cake, isn't it? Anyway, you get the you get the general message that, you know, it's very, very subjective. Now, the single most powerful demonstration of, yes, I know lots of you have seen it before, but the power of top-down prose. How many people haven't heard the backwards Led Zeppelin? Haven't? Okay, that's fine. There's enough of you. This is fabulous if you haven't seen it before, particularly. The claim is made by lots of Christian fundamentalists in America that rock music contains satanic messages. But they believe you can only hear the messages if you play the records backwards. If you play them forwards, you won't hear the message. Play it backwards, and you then can consciously hear the message. But they believe that the message can still have an effect, even though you can't hear it, because it affects the unconscious mind. This is what Robin Innes would probably describe as a bit nutty, okay? And there's no evidence to support it whatsoever. But there are, again, loads of websites you can go to, and this is the absolute top of the satanic pops. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it to you first forwards, mainly because I just like it. Not the whole song, just a clip. And then I'm going to play it backwards, and my prediction is that the first time I play it, it'll just sound like nonsense. You might pick up on a word or two, but that will be it. Then I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to hear, and I'm going to play it again. And the second time I play it, you will hear the message as clear as a bell, and you will wonder how you missed it the first time. Now, the reason you missed it the first time is because it isn't there. Okay?
If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alone there. It's just a sprinkling for the May Queen. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on.
Now, I've remembered, under the British Psychological Society ethical guidelines, if you don't want to run the risk of becoming the latest recruit to Beelzebub's army, then you may leave the room now. But if you're prepared to take the risk, I am. Okay, so here we go with the backwards version. See if you can hear the message. So one or two nods of recognition. What was the word you heard? Right. Any other offers? No. Could well have been there, but it wasn't. Okay. This is the message. Now, this is quite surprising because it's 35 words long. Here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He'll give you 666, supposedly the devil's number. There was a little tool shed, I can explain the tool shed, where he made us suffer, sad Satan. Now I'm going to play it back again, and this time you will hear that message as clear as a bell. Now you can actually show that to your friends. If you type in Stairway to Heaven backwards into Google, there are loads of sites where you can get it. But do it the way I did it. Don't tell them what they're supposed to hear the first time, because that's the big thing. The difference between the way it sounds when you know what the message is and when you don't know what the message is. Now, we actually decided to do a little study to look at this experimentally. We played 6 backwards clips to 42 volunteer participants, and we asked them to report the words that they could hear. The thing was, half of them, we told them in advance what the messages were, and for the other half, we didn't. And as you might expect, that had a huge effect. The ones that we told the message to, in total, over all 6 clips, they reported over 40 words from the target messages. If we didn't tell them in advance, they reported 3. You know, it's a huge difference. But the most interesting finding from the study was, if you said to the people who were told in advance what the messages were, how many words do you think someone would pick up if they weren't told the message? They estimated it to be about 30. In other words, 10 times more than people actually can hear. And this is the interesting thing. Once you know what the message is, you can't imagine what it's like for someone who doesn't know. It really does affect your perception so strongly. Now, I'm going to give you, because they're quite fun, aren't they? I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the stimuli we used. This one is from the Beatles' Help. I'm going to play it. Unfortunately, the website I've loaded this down from, it has quite a long excerpt at the beginning before you get to the backwards bits. But then we get the backwards bits in a couple of different speeds. So just see if you can pick up the message from the backwards bit. It's a good song anyway.
But every now and then I feel so insecure. I know that I just need your light. I've never done before. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. Yeah, we need to have one night. Yeah, we need to have one night. Yeah, we need to have one night.
Any offers? Oh, there's a lot. Sorry, one at a time. Go on. Oh, the one I love. What was the other one? That is fantastic, because it's totally wrong. It's brilliant. Right, now this, according to the website, is what the message actually is. Now he uses marijuana. So we'll play it again, and this time you'll hear it.
But every now and then I feel so insecure. I know that I just need your light. I've never done before. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. Yeah, we need to have one night. Yeah, we need to have one night. Yeah, we need to have one night.
Okay, one more example. Again, it's from Paul McCartney again. Band on the Run. Again, same procedure. See if you can guess what the message is.
Band on the run, and a jailer man and sailor Sam were searching everyone for the band on the run. Band on the run. The reward map. The reward map. The law. Now we vanished as the reward map. The reward map. The law. Now we vanished as
Any offers? Marijuana again. Yeah, I primed that one too much, didn't I? But there's a bit more as well. It's actually marijuana, marijuana. The law will banish us. And again, you'll hear it this time.
band on the run, and a jailer man and sailor Sam were searching everyone for the band on the run. Band on the run. The reward map. The reward map. The law. Now we vanished as the reward map. The reward map. The law. Now we vanished as
Now, the website that I actually took those from is by a guy called David Oates. And he has developed this really, as you can see from the slide, so it must be true, ridiculous theory called reverse speech theory. What he basically argues is that whenever you are talking to someone, you are producing one message. He says this comes from the left hemisphere, and this is what you can consciously hear me saying to you now. But he says that if you were to record what I'm saying and play it backwards, you would find certain bits, which have been generated by my right hemisphere, that gave a completely different message. And this completely different message would actually reveal my true feelings and my true sentiments. Now, as I said, the technical expression for this theory is it's a load of old bollocks. Absolute rubbish. Having said that, this guy charges, he thinks that you can use this amazing insight in all kinds of situations. So if you were interviewing people, if you were interrogating people in a therapeutic context, I mean, this man's dangerous. And he charges hundreds and thousands of dollars to be trained in this amazing technique. But go to his website, because it's quite a lot of fun. But that's all it is. It is absolute nonsense. Anyway, again, I will give you the same kind of thing. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples from his website. So you'll recognize this first one. It will need no introduction. There'll be a very famous piece of recorded history, and then part of it's played backwards. So see if you can pick up on the message.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Never let it fall. Never let it fall. Never let it fall.
Any offers? That was what was that one? This one, it's close. It goes kind of close. Apparently what the message is man will spacewalk, which doesn't even really make an awful lot of sense because they'd already done spacewalks, hadn't they, by then? But anyway, I'm being picky. I'll play it again and again, the same kind of thing. You'll hear it this time.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Never let it fall. Never let it fall. Never let it fall.
Okay, the next clip is the final one I'm going to play for you. This is from an American official who's making an announcement that basically it was case closed on Roswell. You know, no ET. We knew what had happened. It's finished. And according to David Oates, when you play the message backwards, maybe he's not being quite as honest as he should be. But see if you can hear the hidden message.
I'm sorry, I just don't have any information for that. All I know is what the Air Force did, and that if you overlay much of their claims and you look at the Air Force scientific research, you can see it's obvious that what we're talking about at Roswell.
Any offers? That's quite good, yeah. Share a secret with NASA is what the actual message is supposed to be. And
I'm sorry, I just don't have any information for that. All I know is what the Air Force did, and that if you overlay much of their claims and you look at the Air Force scientific research, you can see it's obvious that what we're talking about at Roswell.
Now, I've got to make it very, very clear. I really don't want you to go away with the impression that these messages are really there. They're not, okay? I mean, you take the kind of Christian fundamentalist claim, wherever the idea originally came from, that these messages were there to be found, you then had a situation where these Christian fundamentalists must have played literally thousands of hours of rock music backwards. Now, that doesn't mean you're listening to Satan. That means you are Satan. These people really need to get out more. So, out of that amount of random material, yes, you will find little snatches here and there that sound like something else. But that's exactly what we'd expect. Okay, now I'm going to wrap up now. I mean, I'm very aware of the fact that I've concentrated just on one side of the coin. I mean, I did start off by saying there are two types of errors you can make. You can either deny that there is real meaning and significance there or some kind of meaningful pattern when really there is one. That's a type 2 error. I've been talking only about type 1 errors. That's because the examples I've chosen, I hope you will accept that there almost certainly is not a real message or pattern there. But as I say, that is ignoring the other side of the coin. There are situations where we might deny that there is some real meaning and significance in a particular pattern. And in fact, we're wrong. There really is something. So you have to get that balance right. And it's also important to remember that the same kind of psychological factors that underlie what I've been talking about here are the same kind of psychological factors that lead to creativity in art and to discovery in science. There is a positive side. It's just trying to get the balance right between the two. And I wish Robin Ince was still here now so that he could give this final quotation in the appropriate accent. But this is from Carl Sagan. He says, "What's called for is an exquisite balance between two conflicting needs, the most skeptical scrutiny of all hypotheses that are served up to us, and at the same time a great openness to new ideas. If you are only skeptical, then no new ideas make it through to you. On the other hand, if you are open to the point of gullibility and have not an ounce of skeptical sense in you, then you cannot distinguish useful ideas from the worthless ones." So thanks very much for your attention.
Out of interest, have you ever tried to listen to one of your talks backwards?
Apparently they make as much sense backwards as forwards, I've been told.
Okay, I think we've got about 5 minutes of questions. Do you want to field them yourself, or do you want
I'll
me to?
let you have the honour.
Okay. Well, this microphone will be roaming, so do you want to just go with the gentleman?
This gentleman here.
Oh, Robert T. from the Humanist Society of West Yorkshire. Sportsmen seem particularly superstitious. They wear some item of clothing, they do well, and next time that item of clothing has to be there, whatever. This does seem to be something that people just accept, that no one challenges them on it.
I mean, there is. Sportsmen people are notoriously superstitious, as are people in other kinds of occupations where a successful outcome doesn't depend solely on following a set procedure. Other things can go wrong. So you'll find that kind of actors, military people, sports people, as you say, the most superstitious people of all are probably gamblers. But all those kinds of occupations are associated with lots of superstitious behaviour. You tend to find that accountants don't engage in little rituals. They just kind of do the job, you know. Now, I guess exactly as you say, I mean, you know, I shouldn't admit this, but these kind of tendencies are very strong. I remember the very first time I appeared on a daytime TV programme, I decided just on a whim that I was going to wear red socks. I thought if it's good enough for Paxman, it's good enough for me. So I put my red socks on, went and did the telly thing, and it went okay. And guess what? Next time I was invited to do something on the telly, I found myself rooting around in the sock drawer for my red socks. You know, super skeptic. Oh no. I mean, it's easy to see how these things happen. You know, we make these associations. There's a classic experiment by B.F. Skinner, the psychologist, looking at superstition in pigeons. And what he did, I mean, I won't go into, you probably all know about kind of classical condition and operant condition and things like that, but what Skinner did in this experiment was just had the pigeons in a box, and every so often, just at random, didn't matter what the pigeon was doing, just at random, food would be released. And after a while of being in the box, he noted that their behaviour had changed. And they were kind of engaged in what looked, to all intents and purposes, like little rituals. So they might be walking around in a little circle, they might be bobbing their head in a particular way. And the explanation was that the moment that the food had appeared, whatever behaviour they happened to be engaged in had been reinforced. And so they were more likely to be carrying that out next time food was released, which reinforced it further, till in the end, they were engaged in what looked like these little superstitious rituals. Almost, I mean, you know, the behaviourists wouldn't have gone in for this mentalist talk, but almost as they thought they could actually influence the successful outcome. And yeah, I mean, the anecdotal evidence related to sports people is fascinating. Some of the behaviour, you know, really is well, it's obsessive compulsive behavior. They have to do it. And of course, by going through the ritual, it might actually help them to get into a kind of calm mental space where they are ready to perform, and by preventing them from doing the ritual, you almost certainly would make them feel anxious, and it would affect their performance. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sorry, did I go on a bit there, didn't I? I'm sorry.
Nearest one.
I'm hanging about afterwards, so do feel free to come and have a chat.
Just on your bit about a suggestion giving the meaning to something, do you think that's why they have a little explanation at the bottom of modern artworks?
Well, I mean, it's a very, very good question, because I mean, the whole kind of Emperor's New Clothes type story is obviously an illustration of the kinds of things I've been talking about. And many people feel that modern art might be seen to be in that kind of category. People are reading sheer profundity. I mean, the classic example, maybe not modern art, but kind of you from that kind of same school of thought of postmodernism, is Alan Sokal's famous Hoax, which you're probably aware of. There are kind of journals of postmodernism which take a very kind of, what's the word? Truth is relative. You have your truth, I have my truth kind of notion. And they basically write articles that just sound extremely profound, have lots of big words, and are basically nonsense. So what Alan Sokal, a physicist, did was to write an article for one of these journals, and he deliberately made it absolute nonsense from a scientific point of view, but he put in lots of the right buzzwords and so on. And they published it in the kind of leading postmodern journal, and then he revealed to the world that it was absolutely total nonsense, and that this was, you know, a real case of the Emperor's New Clothes. And I think it makes the point very effectively. If you're in a situation where you're convinced that there is meaning and significance here, and you're determined to find it, you can read it in almost anything.
Well, thank you for that very interesting and entertaining talk, Christopher French.